come here ASAP. He's calling for Mom. I received a call from my husband saying that our 8-year-old son, Alex, had fallen from the 3rd floor of the apartment building. He was seriously injured, semi-conscious, and had been urgently taken to the hospital. There's no way I'm going. I blurted out a response impulsively. But that child is. I swallowed the words I was about to say and fell silent. Then my husband lashed out at me, saying, "What a cold-hearted woman you are. It's understandable to be thought of in such a way. But there was a deep reason for it. I am Mandy, 35 years old. After graduating from university, I worked as a full-time employee at a publishing company. But after getting married, I switched to part-time work. I lived with my husband, Brian, who is 5 years older than me, and our 8-year-old son, Alex. However, Brian was always busy with work, leaving all the household chores and childcare to me. Despite that, his salary was low, so the living expenses he gave me were minimal. I managed to cover our expenses with my part-time income. The most stressful part was dealing with our son, who was going through a rebellious phase. Even when I tried to talk to him, he would respond indifferently. And his attitude was getting worse day by day. One day, after coming home from school, Alex started washing his hands, throwing his backpack aside. Usually, he would immediately go to his room with his things. So I wondered what was going on and peeked into the washroom. "What are you looking at? Why are you so confrontational?" "Because I hate you, that's why." As I sighed and was about to tidy up his backpack, he shouted, "Don't touch it." Taken aback by his forcefulness, Alex stood imposingly in front of me and glared. "You'll dirty it if you touch it. That's going too far. Apologize." "Shut up. You're annoying." Realizing this was not right, I admonished him about his way of speaking. However, he seemed to have no intention of changing his attitude and turned his back on me after scoffing. That's when I noticed blood oozing from his hand. "You're injured. Wait here while I disinfect it." Alex snatched the first aid kit I brought, saying, "It's none of your business," and disinfected not only his hand but also his scraped knee himself, refusing to let me touch it. This is troublesome. Considering this a phase everyone goes through, I decided to move on and place the pancakes I had made on the table. They were his favorite, and he would always eat them even if he was angry. But that day, perhaps because he was in such a bad mood, he threw the pancakes in the trash without touching them. "Hey. Wasting food is absolutely unacceptable. Then you pick it up from the trash and eat it." He said this coldly and then locked himself in his room with his backpack, thinking that provoking him further would only make him more stubborn. I looked at the discarded snacks with a sense of futility. When my husband came home at night, I discussed the situation with him, but he only replied, "I've left the childcare to you." He didn't take it seriously. Still, worried about the continuation of this relationship, I asked Brian to talk to our son when he had time. However, my husband said, "I'm tired. Please spare me this," and went to sleep in the bedroom immediately. Despite my son Alex's rebellious attitude towards me, I continued to live in a state of unease. A few days later, while Alex was at school, I was cleaning his room when I noticed a diary on his desk. Even though he's my son, would reading this be invading his privacy? But, despite my internal conflict, my desire to understand why he was always so hostile towards me led me to pick up the diary. Just then, my phone rang. It was my husband, Brian. "It's terrible. Alex fell from the 3rd floor of the apartment." "What?" Confused, I asked, "Which apartment?" To which Brian hesitated, saying, "It's..." From his reaction, I had a feeling I knew which place he was talking about. "Is Alex all right?" "He's in the operating room right now." "What should I do?" I asked where he was, and he told me he was at the emergency center in the next town. He had received a call from the police while at work, informing him that Alex had been urgently taken to the hospital. Anyway, come here ASAP. He's calling for Mom. There's no way I'm going. I replied impulsively. But that child is. Before I could say more, my husband scornfully said, "What a cold-hearted woman." It was understandable that he would say such a thing. After apologizing, I asked again about my son's condition, and learned that he was semi-conscious and seriously injured. Oh no. What should I do? Despite my panic, I immediately got into my car and rushed to the hospital. Upon arrival, I found my husband sitting despondently in the waiting room. My son had broken his arm and leg and was undergoing emergency surgery. However, according to the police, there was a flower bed where Alex fell, which cushioned his fall, allowing him to survive the impact. After being told by the doctor to prepare for the worst, I couldn't stop my tears. An hour later, waiting in front of the operating room, my son was wheeled out on a stretcher. I hurried over and spoke to him, but he weakly called out for Mom, Mom, as if delirious. When Alex was moved to the intensive care unit, the doctor told us, "His consciousness is clouded, so we cannot say anything for sure right now. We'll do everything we can." After receiving instructions for the hospital admission process from a nurse, my husband urged me to go home to get our insurance card. Once home, I remembered Alex's diary and decided to look inside, where I found writings about how he disliked me and the reasons why. So that's why he was so cold towards me. However, I knew I couldn't judge everything based on Alex's diary alone, since my husband had said he would contact me if anything happened. I went into Brian's room to look for something and found his old mobile phone. After charging it and turning it on, I exclaimed in surprise, "What?" Then, I immediately contacted someone and learned a secret about my husband. I'll confront Brian thoroughly. Filled with a fighting spirit, I returned to the hospital where my son was. There, I found my husband in the waiting room, calculating something on a calculator. "Sorry to keep you waiting. How is Alex?" Brian, puzzled, asked, "Huh? He hasn't woken up yet." "Wait, why is Jane with you?" I contacted her and went to pick her up. The person I had contacted was Jane, Alex's biological mother. It seems Alex was calling for her when he said, "Mom." Alex was Brian's child from a previous relationship, and we had only been remarried for a year. After briefly explaining the situation, the nurse quickly assisted us, leading Jane and me to my son. Brian, looking anxious, followed us. As we approached Alex's room, Jane hurried towards him. Jane tightly gripped Alex's hand, tears streaming down her face, and cried out, "Mom is here. Please wake up. If I could take your place, I would. I don't live in that apartment anymore." I didn't know. In fact, the apartment where Alex fell was the place where he used to live with Brian and Jane when they were married. When I asked Brian which apartment it was, his hesitation made it clear to me. According to the police's explanation at the hospital, Alex had tried to climb from the first floor to the third floor using the balcony. He had gone to visit Jane, but since the front door was not open, he took such action. The thought of him going to such lengths to meet his biological mother brought tears to my cheeks again. However, Brian grabbed Jane's shoulder tightly and glared at her sharply. "After having an affair, you have the nerve to show up here. I told you, that was a misunderstanding. In the end, your promiscuous behavior was recognized, and I won custody of Alex. Just admit it." Listening silently, I felt a rush of heat through my body, and shook off Brian's hand from Jane's shoulder. Then, grabbing his hand, I left the intensive care unit, leaving only Jane behind. you told me the reason for our divorce was Jane's affair, right? But you told Alex a different story, didn't you? Brian, as if telling me to be quiet, raised his eyebrows and tried to silence me. Realizing that Brian would not tell the truth, I showed him our son's diary. It was written that I had an affair with Brian and took him away from Jane. Moreover, it was noted that Alex had heard this directly from Brian. From Alex's perspective, it was easier to harbor anger towards me, whom he was told was the other woman. I finally understand why Alex dislikes me so much. It was all because of you. We met after you divorced, right? I couldn't tell him that Jane had an affair. It would only hurt Alex. Oh, I found emails on your old phone. You asked a friend to seduce Jane. And I know that friend eventually turned you down. Brian was cheating with another woman at the time, and had even gone into debt to buy her expensive gifts. After being abandoned by that woman and left with the debt, Brian fabricated the story of Jane's affair to divorce her and claim compensation. This fact is undeniable since you asked your friend in an email. I also found Jane's contact information from this phone. Try to make an excuse if you can, and I shoved the phone in his face. Clearly, he turned pale and panicked. You were the one who fabricated Jane's affair. The photo you saved on your phone is clearly a composite. Are you trying to frame me? I worked as a photographer for a publishing company. It's obvious at a glance. The neck position is slightly off because you just pasted a face onto it. Pointing at the part, Brian started sweating. To an amateur, it might not be noticeable, but it was clear to a professional photographer like me. So what does that mean? Give custody of Alex to Jane. Brian refused, shaking his head, claiming it was absurd. You only took custody of Alex for the child support money. You still have debts, don't you? I had found not only the phone but also bills from financial companies in his room. The remaining debt was still $30,000. It's insane to spend so much. She said she wanted a Birkin, and I couldn't say no. Oh, really? And how much child support were you getting from Jane each month? $600 each. As I looked at my husband's face, whispering in a barely audible voice, I felt an immense sense of pity. It is unacceptable to separate a mother and her son, who seek each other, just to take away compensation and child support. Shaking with anger, he deeply bowed his head to me. This is one of my lifetime requests. Please help me pay off the debt. Request denied. How many lifetime requests do you even have? Brian mumbled something, unable to articulate his thoughts. Tell me, why did you marry me? I had been raising Alex for a year and realized I couldn't handle parenting. According to him, it was a miscalculation that I switched to part-time work after we got married. But he thought it was good enough if I could take care of our son and help pay off some of the debt. He was using 2/3 of his salary for repayments, which is why the living allowance he gave me was so little. Moreover, he was agitated after our son fell from the apartment because he thought he would lose the child support. I was calculating and realized if Alex didn't make it, we'd get the life insurance payout, right? At this point, I was astounded by his thought process. I've understood enough about what you think and your situation. So, then, I'm divorcing you. And I'll make sure Jane gets Alex's custody. Continuing like this, you might end up being guilty of fraud for the compensation and child support you've been collecting. My words startled him, and he nervously said, I don't want any trouble with the police. When I told him I've already referred Jane to a lawyer I know, Brian, realizing the situation was beyond repair, agreed to relinquish custody. This is bad. What about the debt? It's your responsibility to pay it back. Goodbye. Leaving my dazed husband behind, I returned to the ICU where Alex and Jane were. At that moment, I asked the nurse to prevent Brian from entering the room as Alex would dislike it. Alex, please open your eyes. Moved by Jane's voice, Alex slowly opened his eyes. A doctor came immediately, examined him, and assured us there was no longer any concern. Mom. I wanted to see you. Me too. They hugged each other tightly, rejoicing in their reunion. I've talked to your dad. Alex, from now on, you can live with your real mom. Alex responded, what? Surprised, both Alex and Jane listened as I relayed the truth I had learned from Brian. At 8 years old, Alex seemed to understand everything. Thank you. I was mistaken. That's okay. But your mistake was climbing the apartment balcony. Don't do anything dangerous again. I won't. I promise. Watching Alex smile broadly back at me, I felt he could finally grasp happiness. Jane caressed Alex's cheek lovingly, her face wet with tears of joy. Thank you so much. I don't know how to express my gratitude. I've been terrible to you, sorry. And thank you. Moved by my son's words, I burst into tears. I'm passing the baton to Jane as the mother. Alex, make up for the time you've had to endure by being spoiled by your mom. Although it was hard to part with Alex, whom I had considered my son for a year, it was best for them to be together. I handed Jane Alex's health insurance card and stepped out of the room. Ignoring my husband still in a daze in the hallway, I left the hospital. I officially divorced him and demanded $20,000 in compensation. Jane also claimed $35,000 for the compensation and child support she had paid to Brian. To pay these amounts, he borrowed money from high-interest lenders. And after failing to make payments, he received calls at work, leading him to resign. Now, he works in lodging provided by a finance company to repay his debts. His life will be difficult, but it's all his doing. Later, Jane informed me she had regained custody and was living with her son. I returned to full-time work, enjoying my job freely. Recently, my photography has been getting attention, bringing me joyful days.